You touched on this earlier about the use of technology in the classroom and mobile phones usage at night not be good for sleep. There is quite a lot of concern around what impact is the use of technology having on developing brains. Should we be very worried about it, or what's best practice, I suppose?
I think the first thing is that we all have to recognise that technology brings enormous benefits. It's not going away either. So we can throw our arms up and be all worried about it, but that's not terribly useful. It's not going away, and I'm glad it's not going away because it brings enormous benefits. It is, for a start, extremely mind-opening, mind-expanding. I mean, I know that we've seen plenty of examples of narrowing of views and people's narrow-minded views also having space to be aired on social media. But leaving that aside, if I think back to my time as a teenager, when the only people's views who I ever came across were my parents and the school where I was, and I lived in the country all the time, so I wasn't being exposed to anyone else other than people really exactly like me, and my views were very, very narrow. And when I see teenagers now, and when I think about my daughters, who are not teenagers anymore, but when I think about them growing up and how much more knowledgeable they are about important things in the world, like how other people think and how other people live, the amount that they know things that I didn't know is I think really heartening. I think also in terms of social media, there are huge benefits for people, young people particularly, or young people as an example, in any groups who find it difficult to find other people like them in their actual physical group, in their school or whatever. So it becomes much easier for people to have conversations and build relationships, build friendships with people who are like them, who they never would have met if it hadn't been for the whole online world and technology. And in terms of knowledge, being able to find out things, being able to find out anything about almost anything, technology gives us that. It also gives us a lot of rubbish information out there that we have to learn to pick our way through and find out what's true. But there are all those benefits. Then schools, when they're talking about the negatives, will tend to focus on safety, on online safety, in terms of things like not giving away your personal information, or not agreeing to meet someone, you're not trusting that someone who you've only communicated with online is who they say they are. And schools have focused on that almost exclusively. What I think is more interesting than those risks, is things to do with distraction and concentration and multitasking.
There's lots of talk about attention, teenagers or people's attention spans generally being much shorter, because they're sort of used to this instant gratification of news on their mobile phones.
Yes, I think there's definitely a tendency for us to skim, because we are certainly being bombarded by a mass of information, and information scientists have quantified this and come up with all sorts of figures, ranging from 3 times or 5 times the amount of data that comes at our eyes on a daily basis compared to all of us using the internet. But I think that anyone who believes the headlines about human concentration span reducing, or teenage or children's concentration span reducing, only needs to look at a young person playing a video game or playing a computer game for hours and hours and hours. I just don't buy the argument that our concentration spans are reducing. I think that there is, and clearly this is the case, that there is a great deal more competition for our attention. And if we're not fully engaged on something, then it could be harder for someone, say a teacher or a writer, to engage our attention, because we've got so many other distractions, particularly if we're reading on a screen. So if we're reading something on a screen, so for example, if a teacher has asked the students to investigate a particular topic for their homework. And so the students have gone home and they've got their computers out and they've gone onto the internet. And after a little while, they will come to a website that gives them what they think is the information that they're looking for, and they'll start to read it. And very quickly, they will notice, or it'll become apparent, that there's a lot of competition for their attention on that screen, because a website will typically have other icons and adverts and moving things down the sides, down the left and the right usually, which are designed to attract your attention away from the text that you're reading. But even if you use, and it would be your prefrontal cortex that you would need to use to keep yourself focused on the text that the page that you're trying to read.
Isn't fully developed in teenagers.
Exactly. So even if you manage to do that and you manage to focus on the text on this page and to ignore the distractions down the side, you've still got a distraction on the page because you've got hyperlinks, because every online article has hyperlinks, and anyone who ever is asked to write for online, for the internet, for the web, is told to put in lots of hyperlinks. And so as the young person, or anyone, this applies equally really to anyone, as you're reading this and you're coming to a hyperlink, each time you come to a hyperlink, part of your concentration is distracted by the idea that there is something maybe more interesting if we click on that hyperlink. And we're programmed to be curious. I've mentioned already that we're programmed to be social. We're also programmed to be curious. And it's right, teachers would want students to be curious. What would I find? Might I find something even better, even more interesting? Because probably I've now been reading this page for 3 minutes, and that's way longer than I want to read it. And how long is it anyway? Because on a page on the internet, on the web, you don't know how long it is.
Forever,
exactly. And so you start thinking ahead and scrolling ahead and seeing how long it is. And so it's very tempting to click on that hyperlink. And those distractions will happen over and over again in one piece of writing. And there is some interesting research, I'm not sure if it's been repeated, so how strong it is, but it's very interesting, which suggests that the act of resisting the temptation to click on the hyperlink occupies more of your concentration, more of your brain bandwidth than clicking on the hyperlink would have done, because resisting temptation involves the control centers of your brain, which are difficult to put into action. So there's all of that distraction going on. We know there are all sorts of pieces of research that show that if we're trying to focus on a piece of work, whether it's on a screen or on print, if there is a phone, our phone, or anyone else's phone actually next to us, or if the person sitting next to us has their laptop open and we're trying to read on paper and print, but there's a phone there and or there's a laptop open there, that our concentration is impaired, even though it's not our laptop and even if it's not our phone. Very often it is our phone. Very often we, and young people would be the same, we're working on something and our phone is there and it's occupying part of our concentration, part of our brain bandwidth. So there are huge challenges for teachers, but the other challenge is that teachers have to incorporate technology into the classroom because it's part of the real world and it's part of how we all learn. And how young people will have to operate in the world outside. So banning the technology isn't going to work. Restricting it may work for younger children, but for older ones, for teenagers, it really needs to be about self-control and self-management. Although I do think that some digital switch-off times for a whole group, whether it's a whole class or a whole school or a whole family, are a good idea.